The silence before dawn always felt heaviest to Blake Ashford, but that particular morning in December of 1876, it carried something different, a stillness so profound. It made his breath catch as he stepped out of his modest ranch house in Fort Lyon, Colorado Territory. The cold bit through his heavy coat, and the snow that had fallen through the night lay thick and undisturbed across his land, stretching out toward the Arkansas River beyond. He had lived alone on this property for 3 years now, ever since he had saved enough money working cattle drives to buy his own piece of earth, and he had grown accustomed to the solitude. But as his boots crunched through the fresh powder toward the barn where his 2 horses and handful of cattle waited for their morning feed, something made him stop. At first, he thought it was just a drift of snow piled against the barn's weathered wooden side, perhaps blown there by the fierce winds that had howled through the night. But drifts did not wear dark fabric, and they did not have the unmistakable shape of a human form curled in on itself. Blake's heart hammered against his ribs as he broke into a run, his 26-year-old legs carrying him swiftly across the remaining distance. He dropped to his knees beside the figure, his hands already reaching out even as his mind tried to process what he was seeing. It was a woman, young by the look of her, though her face was pale as the snow itself, her lips tinged with blue. She wore a traveling dress that had once been fine but was now torn and soaked through, offering no protection against the brutal cold. Her dark hair, matted with ice crystals, spread around her head like a frozen halo. Blake's first instinct was that she was already gone, that he had found a corpse rather than a person, but then he saw the barest whisper of breath escaping her lips, so faint it was almost invisible in the frigid air. "Miss," he said urgently, his voice rough from disuse. He had spoken to no one but his animals for nearly a week. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, just barely, and her lips moved. Blake leaned closer, turning his ear toward her mouth to catch whatever sound she might make. What came out was so soft, so fragile, that he almost missed it entirely. "Please," she breathed, the single word carrying the weight of desperation and something else, terror. "Do not let them find me." The words sent a chill through Blake that had nothing to do with the December cold. He did not hesitate. Whatever trouble this woman was in, whatever she was running from, it would have to wait. Right now, she was dying, and he had only minutes to change that. He stripped off his coat and wrapped it around her, then scooped her into his arms. She weighed less than he expected, her body frighteningly light, and he could feel how deeply the cold had penetrated. He had seen frostbite and hypothermia before during harsh winters on the trail, and he knew the signs were not good. He kicked open the door to his house and carried her straight to the fireplace, where the embers from last night's fire still glowed faintly. He laid her on the rug before the hearth and immediately set about building up the fire, his hands moving with practiced efficiency even as his mind raced. Once flames were crackling and throwing heat into the room, he turned his attention back to the woman. Her breathing remained shallow, and her skin felt like ice beneath his touch. Blake had no wife, no sister, no female presence in his life to handle such delicate matters, but propriety would have to take a distant second place to survival. He knew that her wet clothes would kill her if they stayed on, that he needed to get her warm and dry as quickly as possible. Working as quickly and respectfully as he could manage, he removed her soaked garments, averting his eyes as much as possible while still accomplishing the task. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then carried her to his bed, tucking her in close to the warming stones he had heated by the fire and wrapped in cloth. For the next several hours, Blake worked tirelessly. He heated water and used warm cloths to gently raise the temperature of her extremities, careful not to warm them too quickly, which he knew could cause more damage. He spooned drops of warm broth between her lips whenever she seemed conscious enough to swallow. He monitored her breathing and pulse, relieved to find both growing gradually stronger as the hours passed. It was nearly noon when her eyes finally opened fully. They were a striking green, clear and bright despite everything she had been through, and they fixed on Blake with an intensity that made him draw back slightly. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse but stronger than that desperate whisper from the morning. "My ranch, just outside Fort Lyon," Blake replied, keeping his voice gentle. "I found you by my barn this morning. You were nearly frozen to death." Her eyes widened and she tried to sit up, panic flashing across her face. Blake held up his hands in a calming gesture. "Easy now," he said. "You are safe here, but you need to rest. You have been through a terrible ordeal." She searched his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she could trust him. Finally, she sank back against the pillows, though tension still radiated from her body. "My name is Blake Ashford," he offered. "This is my ranch. You are welcome to stay as long as you need to recover." Another pause then. "Rose Nelson." "Well, Miss Nelson, can you tell me what happened? How you came to be lying in the snow beside my barn?" Fear flickered in her eyes again, and she turned her face away. "It is a long story." "I have got time," Blake said simply. "And if someone is after you, as you said this morning, I should know what I might be dealing with." Rose was silent for so long that Blake thought she might refuse to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a nightmare lived. "I was supposed to be married yesterday," she began, still not looking at him, "to a man named Vernon Caldwell. He is a wealthy rancher from north of Denver, 43 years old and respected in the territory. My father arranged the match. I am 20 years old, and my father said it was time I married well, that Vernon could provide for me in ways our family no longer could after the financial troubles following the war." Blake said nothing, just listened, his jaw tightening as he began to understand. "I did not love Vernon, but I was prepared to honor my father's wishes," Rose continued. "I thought that perhaps love would come with time, that I could learn to be content. But then, 2 days before the wedding, I overheard Vernon talking with one of his men. He was drunk, and he was bragging about his first wife." She paused, and Blake saw her hands clench the blankets. "Vernon's first wife died 3 years ago. Everyone said it was an accident, that she fell down the stairs of their home. But I heard Vernon laughing about it, about how easy it had been to stage, how no one had questioned it. He killed her because she had failed to give him sons, because she had become, in his words, useless to him. And he was already talking about what he would do if I proved equally disappointing." Blake felt anger rising hot in his chest. "You told your father," Rose laughed bitterly. "My father did not believe me. He said I was getting cold feet, making up stories to avoid the marriage. Vernon is too important, too respected. When I insisted I would not marry him, my father locked me in my room. The wedding was to go forward whether I consented or not." "So you ran," Blake said. "I climbed out my window in the middle of the night, took one of the horses from our stable, and rode south. I knew Vernon would come after me. He is not a man who accepts defiance, and calling off the wedding would damage his reputation. I thought if I could reach the railroad in Pueblo, I could disappear, start a new life somewhere he would never find me. But the storm caught me. My horse went lame about 5 miles from here, and I had to continue on foot. I was so cold, so tired. I saw your barn and thought perhaps I could shelter there until morning, but I must have collapsed before I reached it." Blake absorbed this, his mind working through the implications. "Your father and this Vernon, they will be looking for you." "Yes," Rose said, meeting his eyes again. "And when they find me, Vernon will either force me to marry him anyway, or—" She did not finish the sentence, but she did not need to. Blake stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. He could see the Arkansas River in the distance, frozen at the edges, and beyond it the vast expanse of Colorado territory. He had come here seeking solitude and independence, wanting nothing more than to build his ranch and live his life free from the complications of other people. But he would not turn this woman over to a murderer, no matter how inconvenient her presence might be. "Then you will stay here," he said, turning back to face her, "until we figure out a better plan." "You do not understand," Rose said urgently. "Vernon has men, hired guns. If they come here and find me, they will not just take me. They will kill anyone who helped me." "Let them come," Blake said, and there was steel in his voice. "I am not in the habit of cowering before bullies, no matter how many guns they have." The look Rose gave him was complex gratitude mixed with worry, hope mixed with fear. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Blake was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Finally, he said, "Because I had a sister once, Emma. She married a man who seemed respectable, who came from a good family. 2 years later she was dead, fell from a horse, they said. But I saw the bruises, the fear in her eyes in the months before she died. I did not do anything then because I did not want to believe what I suspected. I will not make that mistake again." Understanding passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of shared pain and determination. Rose nodded slowly and some of the tension left her shoulders. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I do not know how I will ever repay you." "Get some rest," Blake said. "We will worry about the rest later." Over the next few days, Rose slowly regained her strength. The frostbite on her fingers and toes was painful but not severe, and with Blake's careful tending, she avoided losing any digits. Blake slept on the floor by the fire, giving Rose his bed, and he tried to maintain as much propriety as possible given the circumstances. Still, living in such close quarters inevitably created an intimacy between them, a familiarity that grew with each passing day. Blake discovered that Rose was intelligent and well-read, educated in a way that was uncommon for women in the territory. She had attended a finishing school in St. Louis before her family's fortunes had declined. She could quote poetry and discuss literature, but she also was not afraid of hard work. As soon as she was able to move around, she insisted on helping with the household tasks, cooking meals and tidying the small ranch house. For his part, Blake found himself talking more than he had in years. He told Rose about his childhood in Missouri, about how he had headed west after the war looking for a fresh start. He spoke of his dreams for the ranch, of building up his herd and maybe one day having enough to hire help. He talked about his sister Emma, sharing memories he had kept locked away for years. But beneath their growing comfort with each other lay a constant tension. They both knew that Rose's pursuers would not give up easily, that it was only a matter of time before someone came looking. Blake kept his rifle close and his horses ready, scanning the horizon frequently for any sign of riders. On the 5th day after he had found Rose, his vigilance was rewarded. He spotted them in the late morning, 3 riders approaching from the north, moving with purpose across the snowy landscape. Blake's jaw tightened as he recognized the lead rider's posture, the expensive quality of his coat and saddle. Vernon Caldwell had come calling. "Rose," Blake called into the house, his voice urgent but controlled. "We have company, 3 riders coming from the north." Rose appeared in the doorway, her face going pale. "Is it them?" "I believe so. The man in front looks prosperous enough to be your Vernon." "What should we do?" Blake thought quickly. "Go into the bedroom and stay there. No matter what you hear, do not come out unless I call for you. Understand?" Rose nodded, but before she went, she touched Blake's arm. "Be careful. Vernon is dangerous." "So am I when I need to be," Blake replied. He watched her disappear into the bedroom, then checked his rifle and positioned himself on the porch, the weapon held loosely but ready. He watched the riders approach, forcing his breathing to remain steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The three men reined in their horses about 20 feet from the porch. The man in the lead was indeed prosperous-looking, with a well-trimmed beard and cold blue eyes that assessed Blake with barely concealed contempt. This would be Vernon Caldwell. The two men flanking him were clearly hired muscle, hard-faced men with guns worn low on their hips. "Good morning," Vernon said, his voice carrying the cultured tones of education and wealth. "I am looking for a young woman, dark hair, about 20 years old. She went missing from Denver about a week ago, and we have been tracking her south. Her name is Rose Nelson, and she is my fiancé. I am concerned for her safety in this weather." Blake kept his expression neutral. "Have not seen anyone matching that description. I live alone here." Vernon's smile did not reach his eyes. "Forgive me, but I find that difficult to believe. We tracked horse prints leading in this direction, and they disappeared near your property. Perhaps she sought shelter here without your knowledge. She is not in her right mind, you understand. The stress of the upcoming wedding has made her quite unstable." "I told you," Blake said, his voice hardening slightly. "I have not seen anyone." One of Vernon's men, a lean man with a scar across his cheek, spoke up. "Maybe we should take a look around, boss, just to be sure." Blake shifted the rifle slightly, not quite pointing it at the men but making his position clear. "This is private property. You do not have any right to search it." Vernon's expression darkened. "Now see here, I do not know who you are or what game you are playing, but that woman is mine. Her father gave his consent to our marriage, and I have a legal right to bring her back. Even if this woman you are looking for was here," Blake said carefully, "which I am not saying she is, seems to me a woman of 20 is old enough to make her own choices about who she does or does not want to marry. A woman's choices are subject to her father's authority until she marries," Vernon said coldly. "That is the law, and after she marries, her husband's authority. Rose is confused and frightened, but she will learn to be happy once we are wed. Or she will end up like your first wife," Blake said quietly, "dead at the bottom of a staircase." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vernon's face went rigid and his hand moved toward the pistol at his side. The two hired men immediately drew their weapons, but Blake had his rifle up and aimed before either could fire. "I would not," Blake said, his voice deadly calm. "I was a sharpshooter during the war. I can put a bullet through each of your hearts before you clear leather." Vernon held up a hand, stopping his men. His eyes were chips of ice as he stared at Blake. "So she has been filling your head with her lies. How disappointing. I had hoped to resolve this civilly. The only lie here is the one you have been telling about your first wife's death," Blake said. "Now get off my property." Vernon studied him for a long moment, then smiled a cold, calculating expression. "Very well, we will leave. But this is not over, Cowboy. Rose is legally bound to marry me, and I will have what is mine. If you continue to harbor her, you will be breaking the law. And out here in Colorado territory, the law can be quite harsh on those who interfere in family matters." "Maybe so," Blake replied. "But the law also tends to take a dim view of murder. Might be interesting if someone were to ask the territorial marshal to look into your first wife's death more closely." The threat hung in the air between them. Finally, Vernon turned his horse. "Let us go," he said to his men. As they began to ride away, he called back over his shoulder, "This is not finished, Ashford. Not by a long stretch." Blake stood on the porch, rifle ready, until the three riders disappeared over a rise. Only then did he allow himself to breathe fully again. He heard the bedroom door open and turned to see Rose standing there, her face drawn with worry. "You should not have confronted him like that," she said. "Now he knows you are helping me." "He knew that already," Blake replied, "or at least suspected it. Better to face him directly than let him think he can intimidate us." Rose walked out onto the porch, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. "He will not give up. He will find a way to take me back, or he will kill both of us trying." Blake looked at her, really looked at her, and realized something that had been growing in him over the past 5 days, something he had been trying not to acknowledge. This woman, with her courage and her intelligence and her fierce determination to be free, had become important to him. More than important. The thought of Vernon Caldwell laying a hand on her made Blake's blood boil in a way that went beyond simple protective instinct. "Then we will need to make sure that does not happen," he said. "There might be a way to protect you permanently, but it would require your consent." Rose looked at him questioningly. "What do you mean?" Blake chose his words carefully. "You said yourself that unmarried women are subject to their father's authority, and Vernon claims a legal right to you based on your father's consent to the betrothal. But if you were married to someone else, truly married, then your father and Vernon would have no legal claim." Understanding dawned in Rose's eyes, followed by a complicated mix of emotions Blake could not quite read. "You are suggesting that we marry, you and I." "It would be a marriage of convenience," Blake said quickly, not wanting her to feel pressured. "On paper only, if that is what you want. But it would give you legal protection, make you a married woman with a husband who would not consent to an annulment. Vernon would have no grounds to pursue you." Rose was silent, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "You would do that for me. Tie yourself to a stranger, someone you have known less than a week." "You are not as much a stranger as you were 5 days ago," Blake said. "And yes, I would do that. If it is what you want." Rose turned to face him fully. "And what would you want from me in return? A marriage of convenience is one thing, but men usually expect certain things from their wives." Blake felt his face heat slightly. "I would expect only what you were willing to give freely. Your friendship, your company perhaps, nothing more unless you wished it." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Finally, she said, "I need to think about it." "Of course," Blake replied. "Take whatever time you need. Though we should probably decide before Vernon comes back with more men." That night, Blake lay by the fire, staring at the ceiling and questioning his own sanity. Was he really prepared to marry a woman he barely knew, to tie his life to hers permanently? He had come to Colorado seeking solitude and independence, and now he was contemplating giving up his bachelor existence for a woman who might never see him as more than a protector. But even as he questioned himself, he knew what his answer would be if Rose agreed. Because somewhere in the past 5 days, between nursing her back to health and learning her story and facing down Vernon Caldwell together, something had shifted in him. He cared about her, deeply, in a way he had not allowed himself to care about anyone since Emma's death. The bedroom door opened and Rose emerged, wrapped in one of Blake's blankets. She sat down on the floor beside him, close enough that he could feel her warmth. "I have made my decision," she said quietly. "If your offer still stands, I would like to accept it." Blake sat up, his heart beginning to pound. "You are sure?" "I am sure that I do not want to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for Vernon to find me," Rose said. "I am sure that you are a good man, probably the best man I have ever known. And I am sure that if I must be married to someone, I would rather it be to a man who sees me as a person, not a piece of property." "Then we will do it," Blake said. "Tomorrow, if you are willing, We can ride into Fort Lyon and find someone to perform the ceremony. Tomorrow, Rose agreed. She hesitated, then added, Blake, I want you to know that I will try to be a good wife to you. I know this is not the marriage you might have chosen for yourself, but I will do my best to make sure you do not regret helping me. I could never regret that, Blake said softly. No matter what happens. They sat together by the fire for a long time, not touching but drawing comfort from each other's presence. Outside, the wind howled across the prairie, but inside, a warmth was growing that had nothing to do with the flames crackling in the hearth. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Blake and Rose dressed in their best clothes, which in Blake's case was a clean shirt and his only pair of trousers without patches, and in Rose's case was the dress Blake had purchased from a widow in Fort Lyon 2 days prior, using the last of his spare cash. It was simple calico, nothing like the fine garments Rose had grown up wearing, but she looked beautiful in it nonetheless. They rode into Fort Lyon together, Blake on his steady mare and Rose on his gelding. The town was small, barely more than a collection of buildings clustered around the military fort that gave it its name, but it had a judge who could perform marriages. Judge Horatio Winters was a crusty old man who had been appointed by the territorial governor and ruled his courtroom with an iron fist, but he was known to be fair and incorruptible. Blake and Rose found him in his office above the general store, poring over legal documents. He looked up as they entered, his bushy eyebrows rising. Blake Ashford, he said in his gravelly voice. Have not seen you in town for a while. What brings you here? We would like to get married, sir, Blake said, his hand resting lightly on Rose's back. Today, if possible. Judge Winters leaned back in his chair, studying them both with shrewd eyes. This seems sudden. You've been courting long, not long, Blake admitted, but we are sure of what we want. The judge's gaze shifted to Rose. What about you, young lady? You look like you have had a rough time of it recently. Anyone forcing you into this? Rose met his eyes steadily. No, sir. I want this marriage. Mr. Ashford is a good man, and I am choosing to marry him of my own free will. Judge Winters grunted. All right, then. I will need names and ages for the record. They provided the information, and the judge wrote it down in his careful script. Any reason this marriage should not take place? Anyone likely to object? Blake and Rose exchanged a glance. There may be a man who claims a prior betrothal, Blake said carefully, but the lady broke it off before coming here. She is under no legal obligation to him. That's so. The judge looked interested. Got a name? Vernon Caldwell from north of Denver. The judge's expression darkened. Caldwell, yes, I have heard of him. His first wife died under suspicious circumstances, as I recall, but nothing was ever proven. He looked at Rose with new understanding. You were supposed to marry him. Yes, sir, Rose said, but I learned things that made me fear for my safety, so I ran. Judge Winters nodded slowly. And this marriage, it is your way of making sure he cannot claim you. It is my way of choosing my own future, Rose said firmly. A smile tugged at the corner of the judge's mouth. Good answer. He stood and retrieved his book of legal forms. All right, then. Let us make this official. Do either of you have rings? Blake's heart sank. He had not even thought about rings, and he certainly did not have the money to buy any. But Rose touched his arm gently. We do not need rings to make our promises real, she said softly. Judge Winters chuckled. True enough. All right, let us begin. The ceremony was simple and brief, nothing like the elaborate weddings Rose had probably imagined as a young girl. Judge Winters read through the legal language quickly, asked them each in turn if they consented to the marriage, and pronounced them husband and wife under the laws of Colorado Territory. The whole thing took less than 10 minutes. You can kiss your bride now, Judge Winters said with a hint of amusement in his voice. Blake looked at Rose, suddenly uncertain. They had not discussed this part. Rose solved the problem by standing on her toes and pressing a gentle kiss to his cheek, her hand resting briefly against his chest. It was chaste and proper, but Blake felt the touch burn through him like fire. "Congratulations," Judge Winters said, handing Blake the marriage certificate. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashford, legally wed. If Caldwell comes around making trouble, you show him this." Under territorial law, a married woman is under her husband's authority, not her father's or her former fiancé's. He has no claim on her. "Thank you, sir," Blake said, shaking the judge's hand. As they left the office, Rose Ashford took Blake's arm. They walked back through the town together, and Blake felt the eyes of the townspeople on them. News of their marriage would spread quickly. Vernon would hear about it soon, probably within a day or two. Blake could only hope that the marriage certificate would be enough to make the man back down. They were almost to the horses when a woman's voice called out. "Blake! Blake Ashford, is that you?" Blake turned to see Sarah Jennings, the doctor's wife, hurrying toward them. Sarah was a kind woman in her 40s who had always been friendly to Blake on his infrequent trips to town. "Hello, Sarah," Blake said. Sarah reached them, slightly out of breath. "I heard you just got married. Oh my goodness, why did you not tell anyone you were courting? And who is this lovely young lady?" "This is Rose," Blake said. "Rose Ashford now. We decided not to wait." Sarah beamed at them both. "How wonderful! You must come to dinner tonight, I insist. It is not every day we have a wedding in Fort Lyon, and you deserve a proper celebration." Blake glanced at Rose, who nodded slightly. "That is very kind of you, Sarah. We would be honored." "Excellent. Come by at 6. I will make my special roast." Sarah clasped Rose's hands warmly. "Welcome to Fort Lyon, my dear. I hope you will be very happy here." After Sarah bustled away, Rose looked up at Blake with a slight smile. "She seems nice." "She is," Blake agreed. "One of the few truly kind people I have met in this territory." That evening, they rode back into town for dinner at the Jennings home. Sarah had indeed prepared a feast, and her husband Thomas, the town's doctor, proved to be excellent company. They asked polite questions about how Blake and Rose had met, and Rose proved adept at deflecting the more probing inquiries with vague references to meeting through mutual acquaintances. By the end of the evening, Blake could see that Sarah had adopted Rose as a friend, which could only help matters. The more connections Rose had in Fort Lyon, the harder it would be for Vernon to simply take her. Over the next few weeks, they settled into a routine that was surprisingly comfortable. Blake continued his ranch work, tending to his cattle and horses, repairing fences, and preparing for the harsh winter ahead. Rose took over the household duties and proved to be an excellent cook, transforming Blake's simple provisions into meals that actually had flavor and variety. But it was the evenings that Blake treasured most. After the day's work was done, they would sit by the fire and talk. Rose told him about growing up in a wealthy family in Denver, about the balls and parties she had attended, the books she had read, the dreams she had harbored before her father's financial troubles had forced her toward a marriage she did not want. Blake spoke of his own childhood, of growing up on a farm in Missouri, of the war years he rarely discussed with anyone, of the long cattle drives that had taught him the skills he now used on his own land. Slowly, day by day, they learned each other. Blake discovered that Rose was terrible at sewing but excellent at figures, that she could recite entire passages of Shakespeare from memory, that she was afraid of spiders but completely unafraid of his largest bull. Rose learned that Blake rose before dawn every morning without fail, that he had a habit of talking to his horses as if they were people, that beneath his quiet exterior lay a deep well of kindness and integrity. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, their marriage of convenience began to transform into something else. Blake found himself looking for excuses to be near Rose, to hear her laugh or see her smile. He noticed the way lamplight caught in her dark hair, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about something that excited her. He began to imagine a future that was not just about protecting her, but about building a life together. For her part, Rose found herself watching Blake as he worked, admiring the strength in his shoulders, the gentle competence of his hands. She noticed how he never raised his voice in anger, how he treated even his animals with respect, how he listened when she talked as if her words truly mattered to him. She began to understand that the marriage certificate Judge Winters had issued might have started as a legal protection, but it was becoming something far more real. But neither of them spoke of these growing feelings. The specter of Vernon Caldwell still hung over them, a constant reminder that their situation remained precarious. Blake kept his rifle close and his vigilance high, knowing that the man would not give up easily. His caution proved justified on a cold afternoon in early January. Blake was in the barn, mucking out stalls when he heard riders approaching. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the door, his gut tightening when he saw not 3 riders this time, but 6. Vernon had brought reinforcements. Blake stepped out of the barn, rifle in hand, and called toward the house. "Rose, stay inside." Vernon reined in his horse, the same cold smile on his face. "Ashford, I hear congratulations are in order. Married the woman I was engaged to. That is quite bold of you." "Rose was never engaged to you," Blake said. "She broke off the betrothal before she left Denver." "That is not how the law sees it," Vernon replied. "Her father gave his consent. That creates a binding contract. By marrying her without his permission, you have stolen what rightfully belongs to me." "Rose is not property to be stolen," Blake said flatly. "She is a person and she made her choice. We are legally married under territorial law. You have no claim on her." Vernon's smile widened. "Actually, I think I do. You see, I have done some investigating. Rose was 20 when she ran away, but she will not turn 21 until next month. Under Colorado law, a woman under 21 requires her father's permission to marry. Did you have that permission, Ashford?" Blake's stomach dropped. He had not even thought to ask Rose her exact age, had not considered that particular legal requirement. From the triumph in Vernon's eyes, he knew the man had him trapped. "I thought not," Vernon continued. "Which means your marriage is invalid. Rose is still legally bound to me through her father's consent to our betrothal. And you, Ashford, have committed the crime of harboring another man's fiancé and potentially ruining her reputation. I could have you arrested. Or," Vernon said, his voice dropping to something darker, "you could hand her over now and I will forget about pressing charges. Your choice." Blake's mind raced, searching for a way out, but he could see no clear path. If Vernon had the law on his side, if the marriage truly was invalid, then everything they had done was for nothing. The front door of the house opened and Rose emerged. Blake's heart clenched. He had told her to stay inside, but of course she would not hide while others fought her battles. "Vernon," she said, her voice steady despite the fear Blake could see in her eyes. "This has gone far enough. You do not want to marry me. You want control, possession, but I will never be that for you. Even if you force me to the altar, even if you lock me in your house, I will never submit. I will fight you every day for the rest of my life." Vernon's expression darkened. "You will learn your place, Rose, one way or another." "No," Rose said. "I will not. And if you take me, if you force this, I will make sure everyone knows what you did to your first wife. I will shout it from every street corner, write it in letters to every newspaper in the territory." Your reputation will be destroyed. No one will believe you, Vernon said, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Maybe not at first, Rose agreed. But people will start asking questions. They will investigate, and eventually the truth will come out. Is it worth that risk, Vernon? Is your pride worth potentially being hanged for murder? The standoff stretched out, tension thick enough to cut. Blake watched Vernon's face, saw the calculation happening behind those cold eyes. Finally, Vernon spoke. You think you are very clever, Rose, but you are forgetting something. Even if I let you go, even if I walk away right now, you are still not legally married to this cowboy. Your father can still choose another husband for you, someone who will not hesitate to beat you into submission if necessary. You have gained nothing. She has gained her freedom, a new voice said. Everyone turned to see Judge Winters riding up, his ancient mare picking her way carefully through the snow. The old judge looked as crusty and formidable as ever, his bushy eyebrows drawn down in a fierce scowl. Judge, Vernon said, his voice carefully neutral. What brings you out here? I was in the area, Judge Winters said dryly. Heard there might be trouble. And I have to say, Mr. Caldwell, I do not appreciate you spreading lies about territorial law. Vernon's eyes narrowed. I am not lying. The girl is under 21. She cannot legally marry without her father's consent. That would be true, Judge Winters agreed, if we were in a state with such laws, but Colorado is still a territory, Caldwell. Our laws are different. Here, a woman of 18 or older can marry without parental consent. I should know. I helped write the territorial marriage laws myself. Blake felt hope surge in his chest. Vernon's face went rigid with fury. You are lying, Vernon spat. You cannot possibly expect me to believe that a territorial judge just happened to be passing by at this exact moment. Believe what you like, Judge Winters said. But the fact remains that Blake Ashford and Rose Nelson's marriage is completely legal and binding. You have no claim on her, and if you continue to harass this couple, I will have you arrested for trespassing and menacing. Clear enough. Vernon stared at the judge for a long moment, his jaw working with suppressed rage. Finally, he turned his horse. This is not over, he said, but the words lacked their earlier conviction. Yes, it is, Rose said quietly. Go home, Vernon. Find someone else to terrorize. You will never have me. Vernon dug his spurs into his horse and rode off, his men following. Blake watched until they disappeared from sight, then turned to Judge Winters. How did you know to come? He asked. The old judge smiled slightly. Sarah Jennings sent her son to fetch me. Said she had a feeling there might be trouble, and she was not about to let Vernon Caldwell bully you too. He dismounted stiffly and walked over to Rose. Are you all right, young lady? I am now, Rose said. Thank you, Judge, for everything. No need to thank me, just did my job. He looked between Blake and Rose. Though I will say, when I married you two, I thought it was just a legal maneuver. But watching you just now, I am starting to think there might be more to it than that. Blake and Rose exchanged a glance. Before either could respond, Judge Winters waved a hand. None of my business either way, just be happy, that is all I ask. He climbed back onto his horse with some difficulty. I will be getting back to town now. If Caldwell comes back, you send for me. I will deal with him. After the judge had ridden away, Blake and Rose stood in the snow, suddenly alone. The confrontation had left them both shaking with residual adrenaline, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Rose was in Blake's arms, her face pressed against his chest. He held her tightly, one hand stroking her hair, feeling her trembling gradually subside. It is over, he said softly. You are safe now. Because of you, Rose said, her voice muffled against his shirt. You have given up your solitude, risked your life, all for a stranger who appeared half frozen by your barn. Not a stranger anymore, Blake said. He pulled back slightly so he could see her face. Rose, I know this marriage started as a convenience, as a way to protect you. But somewhere along the way it became real for me. I do not know exactly when it happened, but I care about you, deeply. And if you do not feel the same way, that is all right. I meant what I said. I will never ask more of you than you want to give, but I needed you to know. Rose looked up at him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. You foolish man, she said softly. Do you really not know? I started falling in love with you the first time I woke up and saw you watching over me with such concern in your eyes. Every day since then has just made me more certain. This marriage might have started as a legal protection, but it is not that for me anymore. It has not been for a long time. Blake felt his heart stutter in his chest. You mean that? I mean it, Rose said. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. I love you, Blake Ashford, and if you will have me, truly have me as your wife in every way, I would like nothing more. Blake's answer was to kiss her, pouring all the emotion he had been holding back into that single connection. Rose kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck. They stood there in the snow, holding each other as if they would never let go, and Blake felt something inside him that had been cold and closed for years finally begin to thaw. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Blake smiled, a genuine, joyful expression that felt unfamiliar on his face. Let us go inside, he said. It is too cold out here. They went into the house together, and for the first time Blake did not sleep by the fire. That night, their marriage of convenience became a marriage in truth, sealed not just by legal documents but by genuine love and mutual choice. The winter passed into spring, and spring into summer. Blake's ranch prospered, aided by Rose's head for numbers and organization. She helped him plan his purchases and sales, negotiate better prices for his cattle, and manage his money more effectively than he had ever managed it alone. The lonely ranch house became a home, filled with laughter and conversation and the warmth of shared affection. Vernon Caldwell never returned. Through the Fort Lyon gossip network, they eventually heard that he had married a widow from Pueblo, a woman with 3 grown sons who made it very clear that any mistreatment of their mother would be dealt with harshly. Blake suspected Vernon had learned his lesson about choosing victims who could fight back. Rose's father made one attempt to contact her, a letter that arrived in the summer of 1877. In it, he expressed regret for not believing her about Vernon, though he tried to justify his actions as being in her best interest. He asked her to come home, said he would accept her marriage to Blake if she would just return to Denver so he could see her. Rose wrote back a brief, polite letter. She told her father that she had made a new life in Fort Lyon, that she was happy, and had no intention of returning to Denver. She wished him well, but made it clear that their relationship would never be what it once was. Blake watched her post the letter and saw both sadness and relief in her eyes. She was closing a chapter of her life, but it was a chapter that needed closing. As the months passed, Blake and Rose grew even closer. They learned to work together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs and supporting each other's goals. Blake discovered that Rose had a dream of raising horses, breeding them for speed and temperament, and he helped her start a small breeding program with 2 mares he purchased from a rancher near Pueblo. Rose learned that Blake had always wanted to learn to read better and helped him improve his skills, spending evenings teaching him from her collection of books. In the spring of 1878, Rose told Blake she was pregnant. He lifted her off her feet and spun her around, his joy too great to contain. They began preparing for the baby together, Blake building a cradle from oak wood and Rose sewing tiny clothes by the fire. Their son was born in October of 1878, a healthy boy with Blake's dark hair and Rose's green eyes. They named him Matthew Blake Ashford, and he became the center of their world. Blake discovered that fatherhood came naturally to him, that holding his son in his arms filled a void he had not even known existed. 2 years later, Rose gave birth to their daughter, Emma Rose Ashford, named for Blake's sister and for Rose herself. Emma was a cheerful baby who rarely cried and seemed to find joy in everything around her. Blake would often find Rose singing to the children, her voice sweet and clear, and he would stop whatever he was doing just to listen. The ranch continued to grow. With the money from their horse breeding program and Blake's cattle sales, they were able to add onto the house, creating more room for their growing family. They hired a young man named Thomas to help with the ranch work, giving Blake more time to spend with Rose and the children. Sarah Jennings became one of Rose's closest friends, and their children played together whenever the Ashford family came to town. Judge Winters, crusty as ever, mellowed slightly around the children and was always good for a peppermint stick when they visited his office. Fort Lyon itself grew from a small outpost to a proper town, with new businesses and families arriving regularly. In the summer of 1882, Rose's younger brother Daniel came to visit. He was 23 now, a lawyer who had left Denver to set up practice in Colorado Springs. Over dinner, he told Rose that their father had died the previous winter, peacefully in his sleep. Rose cried for the relationship they had never been able to repair, but she did not regret her choices. Daniel assured her that their father's last words had included her name, that he had died knowing she was happy and safe. Through it all, Blake and Rose's love continued to deepen. They had their disagreements, of course, the normal friction of two strong-willed people building a life together. But they never went to bed angry, always talked through their problems, always remembered what they meant to each other. On winter evenings, after the children were asleep, they would sometimes talk about that December morning in 1876 when Blake had found Rose frozen in the snow beside his barn. They marveled at how a single moment had changed both their lives so completely, how a desperate whisper, "Please, do not let them find me," had led to everything they now had. "You ever regret it?" Rose asked one such evening, curled against Blake's side on the sofa they had bought in Pueblo. "Giving up your solitude, taking on a stranger's problems." Blake looked down at her, at this woman who had transformed his lonely existence into something rich and full of meaning. He thought about his children sleeping in their beds, about the thriving ranch outside, about the life they had built together from that desperate beginning. "Not for a single moment," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. In the spring of 1885, Rose gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Joseph. By this time, the Ashford Ranch was one of the most successful in the region, known for its quality cattle and exceptional horses. Matthew was now 6, already helping his father with small chores and showing signs of becoming as capable a rancher as Blake. Emma was 4, wild and free-spirited, equally comfortable in the barn or helping her mother in the kitchen. Blake, now 35, found himself reflecting on how different his life had become from what he had once imagined. He had thought he wanted solitude, thought he needed isolation to heal from his sister's death and the scars of war. But Rose had shown him that what he really needed was purpose, connection, love. She had healed wounds he did not even know he carried. One evening in late summer, Blake and Rose stood on their porch together, watching the sun set over the Colorado prairie. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Blake put his arm around Rose's waist, pulling her close. "You know," he said, I used to think this land was beautiful because it was empty, because it offered escape, but I was wrong. It is beautiful because of what we have built here, what you helped me build." Rose leaned her head against his shoulder. "We built it together. You gave me safety when I needed it most, but I gave you something too: family, partnership, love. We saved each other, Blake." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Yes, we did." As the years continued to pass, the Ashford family became a fixture in Fort Lyon society. Rose started a small school in town, teaching children whose families could not afford to send them to the larger schools in Pueblo or Denver. Blake served on the town council, using his calm demeanor and practical wisdom to help resolve disputes and plan for the community's growth. Matthew grew into a tall, serious young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. By the time he was 16, he was handling much of the daily ranch work himself, freeing Blake to focus on the business side of things. Emma surprised everyone by developing a talent for veterinary work, learning to treat sick and injured animals with a skill that rivaled the official veterinarian in Pueblo. Joseph, the youngest, showed an aptitude for mathematics and engineering, already talking about wanting to attend university someday. In 1892, when Blake was 42 and Rose was 36, they celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary. Judge Winters, now quite elderly but still sharp as ever, came to the ranch for the occasion, along with Sarah and Thomas Jennings and most of their other friends from town. As Blake stood watching the celebration, his children and friends around him, Rose laughing as she talked with Sarah, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. His life had not turned out anything like he had planned, but it had turned out so much better. That night, after all the guests had left and the children were asleep, Blake and Rose sat by the fire as they had done countless times before. Rose rested her head on Blake's shoulder and he held her close. "You remember what I said that first morning?" Rose asked softly. "When you found me." "Please do not let them find me," Blake quoted. "I remember." "Those words changed everything," Rose said. "They brought you into my life, started this whole journey. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if you had not found me or if you had turned me away." Blake tightened his arm around her. "I will always be grateful that I did not." Rose tilted her head up to look at him. "I love you, Blake Ashford. I have loved you for 16 years and I will love you for all the years we have left." Blake kissed her, a gentle kiss full of years of shared history and enduring love. "And I love you, Rose Ashford. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." The fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the home they had built together. Outside, the Colorado night was clear and cold, stars glittering in the vast darkness. But inside, there was warmth and light and love, everything that truly mattered. As they grew older, Blake and Rose watched their children build their own lives. Matthew married a rancher's daughter from Pueblo in 1894, and they took over the day-to-day running of the Ashford Ranch, building a house on the eastern section of the property. Emma, defying convention, studied veterinary medicine through correspondence courses, and eventually opened her own practice in Fort Lyon, becoming one of the few female veterinarians in Colorado. Joseph, true to his ambitions, attended the Colorado School of Mines and became an engineer, though he returned to Fort Lyon frequently to visit his parents. Blake and Rose, no longer burdened with the constant demands of ranch work, found a new rhythm to their lives. They traveled occasionally, visiting Denver and Colorado Springs, seeing parts of the territory now the state of Colorado. As of 1876, they had never explored. But they always came home to their ranch, to the place where their story had begun. In the spring of 1898, They became grandparents for the first time when Matthew's wife gave birth to a daughter. Holding his granddaughter in his arms, Blake felt the circle of life completing itself in a beautiful way. This child would grow up in a world of love and security, never knowing the kind of desperation that had driven Rose into the snow all those years ago. More grandchildren followed. Matthew and his wife had 4 children in total, and Emma eventually married another veterinarian and had 2 children of her own. Joseph married a schoolteacher from Denver and had 3 children. Blake and Rose's home became a gathering place for this extended family, full of noise and laughter, and the chaos that comes with multiple generations under one roof. On a quiet evening in December of 1905, Blake and Rose sat together on their porch, wrapped in blankets against the cold. It was almost exactly 29 years since that morning when Blake had found Rose frozen in the snow. They were both in their 50s now, their hair streaked with gray, but their love had not diminished with age. "I was thinking," Rose said, "about that morning. About how close I came to dying, and how finding you saved my life in more ways than one." "I was thinking about it too," Blake admitted. "About how I almost did not go to the barn that morning. I was tired, considered putting off the chores for an hour. If I had, I might not have found you in time." Rose shuddered slightly and pressed closer to him. "Fate brought us together. It had to. The alternative is too terrible to consider." "Not fate," Blake said softly. "Grace. We were both lost in our own ways, both needing something we did not even know we needed. And somehow, against all odds, we found each other." Rose turned her face up to kiss him. "Promise me something, anything. Promise me that when we are old and gray, well, older and grayer than we already are, you will still sit with me like this. That we will still talk by the fire and watch the stars and remember how it all began." "I promise," Blake said. "Always." They kept that promise. Through the years that followed, through illnesses and losses and joys and celebrations, they remained constant to each other. When Judge Winters died in 1907, they mourned him together and told their grandchildren stories about the crusty old judge who had helped save their grandmother. When Sarah Jennings passed in 1910, Rose wept in Blake's arms and then organized a memorial service that celebrated her friend's life. In 1915, as the world was changing around them, automobiles becoming more common, electricity reaching even Fort Lyon, the distant rumblings of war in Europe, Blake and Rose celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted an entire weekend. Matthew, now 47 and running the ranch with great success, stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught me what love really means. Who showed me that real strength is not about dominating others, but about choosing kindness and courage every single day. Mom, Dad, you built something here that will last for generations. Not just this ranch, but a legacy of love and family that we will all carry forward." Blake stood, his 65-year-old body still strong despite some arthritis in his hands. He looked around at all the faces gathered there, his children, his grandchildren, his friends. Then his eyes found Rose, and she was smiling at him with the same warmth she had shown him every day for nearly 4 decades. "I do not deserve all this praise," Blake said. "I just did what any decent man would do. I helped someone who needed help. The real miracle is what came after." Rose took a scared, lonely cowboy and gave him a reason to wake up every morning with joy. She made a house into a home, turned isolation into family, transformed survival into true living. "Everything good in my life started the morning I found her in the snow. Everything." Rose stood and took his hand. "We saved each other," she said, her voice strong despite her 59 years. And we built this together, every bit of it. They kissed, to the applause and cheers of their family, and Blake felt the same rush of love he had felt that first time, standing in the snow after Judge Winters had declared them married. The years continued to roll by. Blake and Rose grew older, their bodies slowing down but their minds and hearts remaining sharp. They spent their days in comfortable companionship, tending a garden, reading together, welcoming the constant stream of family members who came to visit. The ranch remained in Matthew's capable hands. The horses Emma had helped breed became renowned throughout Colorado, and Joseph's engineering work helped bring modern improvements to Fort Lyon. In the winter of 1920, Blake developed a persistent cough that would not go away. Rose, ever practical, insisted he see a doctor. The diagnosis was pneumonia, and at 70 years old, Blake's body struggled to fight it off. He spent weeks in bed with Rose never leaving his side. One night, as Blake lay propped up on pillows, his breathing labored, he reached for Rose's hand. "I am not afraid," he said softly. "I have had a good life, the best life, because of you." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "You are not going anywhere yet, Blake Ashford. We still have too many sunsets to watch together." Blake smiled. "Then I will stay. For you I will always stay." And he did. By spring, the pneumonia had cleared, and Blake was back on his feet, weaker than before but alive. Rose had willed him to survive through sheer determination and constant care, and Blake had not had the heart to leave her. They had 3 more years together after that, 3 precious years of quiet contentment. They watched their great-grandchildren being born, saw Fort Lyon transform from a frontier town into a proper modern community, celebrated their 46th wedding anniversary, surrounded by 4 generations of family. On a warm evening in June of 1923, Blake and Rose sat on their porch as the sun set over the Colorado prairie. Blake was 73, Rose 67, and they had been married for 46 years. "Look at that sky," Rose said softly, watching the orange and pink streaks paint the horizon. "Still takes my breath away." "Not as beautiful as you," Blake said, meaning it. To him, Rose would always be beautiful, not because she looked the same as that young woman he had found in the snow, but because he saw in her face all the years of love and partnership they had shared. Rose laughed. "You old charmer. After all these years, you can still make me blush." "Good," Blake said. "I plan to keep doing it for as long as I can." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the day fade into night. Around them, their ranch stretched out, prosperous and well-maintained by Matthew and his sons. Behind them, their house stood solid and welcoming, filled with memories of nearly half a century of marriage. Above them, stars began to appear, the same stars that had watched over them since the beginning. "Blake," Rose said after a long while, "do you ever wish things had been different, that we had met some other way under better circumstances?" Blake considered the question seriously, as he always did when Rose asked him something. Finally, he shook his head. "No," he said. "Because every part of our story, even the hard parts, made us who we are. Your fear and desperation brought you to my barn. My loneliness and grief made me someone who could understand your need for protection. Vernon's cruelty forced us to make choices that we might not have made otherwise. And all of it, every single piece, led to this." He gestured around them, encompassing not just the physical ranch but everything they had built together. "Led to us, to our children, our grandchildren, this life we created. I would not change a single moment." Rose squeezed his hand. "Neither would I, not one moment." They sat together until full darkness fell and the air grew too cold for comfort. Then they went inside together, as they had done every night for 46 years, to their bed and their home and their life built on love. Blake lived to be 76, dying peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1926 with Rose at his side. Rose followed him 3 years later at the age of 73, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under matching headstones that read simply, Blake Ashford, 1850–1926, beloved husband and father, and Rose Ashford, 1856–1929, beloved wife and mother. But their story did not end there. Their legacy lived on through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The Ashford Ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what Blake and Rose had built together. The values they had instilled, kindness, courage, the importance of choosing love over fear, were passed down through the years, shaping each new generation. And sometimes, on cold December mornings when snow covered the Colorado prairie, the descendants of Blake and Rose Ashford would stand on that same porch and remember the story of how it all began. How a desperate woman fleeing a terrible fate had collapsed in the snow beside a lonely cowboy's barn. How her whispered plea had changed 2 lives forever. How a marriage of convenience had transformed into one of the great love stories of their family. They would remember, and they would be grateful, and they would strive to honor the legacy of love that Blake and Rose had left behind. Because some stories are too precious to forget, and some love is too powerful to ever truly die. It lives on, passed from generation to generation. An eternal flame lit on a cold December morning in 1876 and burning still. The Ashford Ranch stood for nearly a century after Blake's death, a thriving operation that employed dozens of people and contributed significantly to Colorado's agricultural economy. When it was finally sold in the 1990s, it was converted into a heritage site, preserving the original house and barn where Blake had found Rose. Visitors could walk through the rooms where they had lived, see the cradle Blake had built for Matthew, read the letters they had written to each other during their rare separations. But the real legacy was not in buildings or land or even in the successful businesses their descendants built. The real legacy was in the love they had shared, the example they had set, the proof they had provided that even in the hardest circumstances, even when everything seems lost, hope and love can prevail. Blake Ashford had been a lonely cowboy who wanted nothing more than solitude and independence. Rose Nelson had been a desperate woman fleeing from a nightmare with no hope and nowhere to go. But together, they had become something greater than either could have been alone. They had become partners, lovers, parents, grandparents, pillars of their community. They had built a legacy that would outlast them by generations. And it had all started with a whispered plea in the snow, and a cowboy's choice to do the right thing, no matter the cost. That simple act of decency had rippled outward, changing not just 2 lives but hundreds, creating a family tree that would eventually spread across the entire country. Years later, one of their great-great-grandchildren, a writer researching the family history, would discover Blake's old journal in the attic of the preserved ranch house. In it, Blake had recorded his thoughts and feelings throughout his life, but the entry from December 15, 1876, stood out. "Found a woman in the snow today," Blake had written in his careful, unpracticed hand. "Thought she was dead at first, but she was just nearly there. She asked me not to let them find her. I do not know who they are or what she is running from, but I know desperation when I see it. I know what it is to be hunted by your past and terrified of your future, so I will help her. Whatever it costs, however it complicates my life, I will help her. Because if Emma had had someone to help her, maybe she would still be alive. I could not save my sister, but I can save this woman. Her name is Rose, and something tells me she is going to change my life." The writer would include this passage in the family history, and readers would marvel at Blake's prescience. He had known, even on that first day, that Rose would change everything. Perhaps it was intuition, or perhaps it was simply the recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else who had been wounded by life and was desperately seeking healing. Whatever it was, Blake had been right. Rose had changed everything, and in saving her, he had saved himself. Their story became part of Colorado folklore, told and retold, embellished and romanticized. But those who knew the truth, their descendants, the people of Fort Lyon who remembered them, the historians who studied their lives, understood that no embellishment was necessary. The real story was beautiful enough on its own. A cowboy finding a frozen woman in the snow beside his barn. Her whispered words changing everything. Two broken people healing each other and building something beautiful from the ruins of their pasts. Love growing in the most unlikely circumstances and enduring through nearly half a century of challenges and joys. It was a story worthy of legend, but it was also something better. It was true. Every word of it, from that first desperate morning to their final days together, was absolutely true. And that truth, more than anything else, was what made their story so powerful. Because if it could happen for Blake and Rose, if two people who seemed destined for loneliness and tragedy could find each other and build a life full of love and meaning, then maybe it could happen for anyone. Maybe no one was ever truly alone. Maybe there was always hope, even in the darkest moments. Maybe love really could conquer all. That was the legacy of Blake and Rose Ashford. Not just the ranch or the horses or the successful businesses or the large family, but the hope they represented. The proof that goodness exists in the world, that decent people will help strangers in need, that love can bloom even in the snow and cold of winter. Their story was a light in the darkness, a reminder that even in the wild and often brutal West, there was room for tenderness and compassion and enduring devotion. It was a story that deserved to be told and retold, passed down through generations, remembered and celebrated. And so it was, and so it would be, for as long as there were people who believed in the power of love and the importance of choosing kindness over cruelty, hope over despair, life over death. Blake Ashford found Rose Nelson in the snow on a cold December morning in 1876, and in that moment, both their lives changed forever. They married for protection and convenience, but they stayed married for love, deep, abiding, transformative love that shaped them and their descendants for generations to come. It was a simple story, really. A cowboy, a woman in distress, a choice to help, and all the beautiful consequences that flowed from that choice. But simple stories are often the truest ones, and the truest ones are often the most powerful. Blake and Rose Ashford knew this. They lived it, every single day of their 46 years together. And in living it, they created something eternal, a love story for the ages, rooted in the soil of Colorado, nurtured by hardship and choice, blooming into something beautiful that would never truly fade. Their whispered words to each other, words of love, of promise, of devotion, echoed through time, carried forward by everyone whose lives they touched. And somewhere in the mystery beyond death, Blake and Rose were together still, watching over the family they had created, the legacy they had built, the love they had proven could survive anything, forever changed, forever together. Forever proof that sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, everything can change for the better. All it takes is one person willing to help, one person brave enough to ask for help, and the courage to let that moment of connection grow into something lasting and true. That was the story of Blake and Rose Ashford. That was their gift to the world. And it was a gift that would keep on giving long after they were gone, a testament to the enduring power of love and the difference one choice can make.